Northam, calling for the legalization and regulation of cannabis in the name of public safety, equity, and undoing the harms of prohibition. Mayor Stoney urged lawmakers to unequivocally pursue restorative justice and is using his voice to advance efforts to responsibly legalize cannabis in the Commonwealth. Virginia NORML applauds Mayor Stoney in calling for the legalization and regulation of cannabis and for the automatic expungement of past offenses. The majority of Virginians agree with the mayor that the responsible use of cannabis by adults ought to be legal, and we look forward to working with him to advance these measures in the General Assembly. It is now my great pleasure to introduce to you the Mayor of Richmond, Virginia, LeVar Stoney.
Hi, I'm LeVar Stoney, Mayor of Virginia's capital, the city of Richmond. Thank you for inviting me to speak on such an exciting, promising topic so deeply connected to our country's current racial justice discourse. For decades, the war on drugs has directly targeted communities of color. Drugs, especially marijuana, have been used as a tool to systematically target Black and brown communities. Research shows that Black and white people use marijuana at roughly the same rates. However, according to a study by the digital newspaper, the Virginia Mercury, there is a vast race-based disparity in marijuana charges statewide. The difference between percentage of residents who are Black and percentage of defendants in marijuana cases who are Black span as wide as 46 points. This is a clear result of the very systemic racism our country cried out against this summer. At this point, it's clear cannabis will be legalized as it should be. But it's not enough to legalize it. When we legalize it, the benefits of that legalization must go to build wealth in communities of color. For me, it's not enough to stop seeing Black communities ravaged by senseless possession charges. I want to see those very same Black communities flourish from investment made possible by legalization. In short, legalization presents an amazing opportunity for restorative economic justice. It's an opportunity to provide well-deserved reparations for decades of pain, displacement, and incarceration. Support for legalizing cannabis has increased considerably. Our vocal support of the communities who bore the brunt of policing, it should keep pace. Here's how that could happen. First, all taxes raised on newly legalized recreational cannabis products should go towards supporting the students who need it the most through our state's at-risk add-on. The at-risk add-on is an influx of education funding benefiting schools with the highest percentage of students receiving free lunch. It overwhelmingly benefits Black and brown students, helping them reach their full potential. These kids deserve those tax dollars. Second, maximize the entrepreneurial opportunity for communities of color above all else. I don't want to suddenly see cannabis co-opted from a community that has been unfairly targeted for its possession. We've seen it happen. We must create the infrastructure to actively guard against it. Both of these initiatives would return the profits of legalization to the very groups who have borne the disproportionate burden in the past. It's not enough for the state to simply take the knee off the neck of people of color. They have the added responsibility to lift them up. I'm hopeful that when legalization becomes a reality in the Commonwealth of Virginia, we won't stop there. I hope we look critically at the issue through a restorative justice lens, using it as an opportunity to make up for lost time and a chance to dismantle racist systems.
I'm happy to welcome Robert Hoffman from Students for Sensible Drug Policy, who will bring our next discussion looking at cannabis law enforcement from another perspective.
Hello, my name is Robert Hoffman from Students for Sensible Drug Policy. According to a study by the Cato Institute, legalizing cannabis will decrease the violence and drug trafficking perpetuated by the failed war on drugs. At the same time, today in America, immigrants caught consuming or possessing cannabis can have their legal status revoked, even in states where it's legal. I'm very excited to introduce our speakers for today's discussion. Kathy Brady, the Senior Staff Attorney for the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, Alex Narasta, the Director of Immigration Studies for the Cato Institute, and Carlos Ballesteros at the Injustice Watch. To take part in the conversation, visit the National Cannabis Festival on Twitter and use the hashtag CannaSummit2020. Carlos, let's get this started.
Thank you for having us, and welcome to our panel, Gateway Drug, Cannabis and Immigration. My name is Carlos Ballesteros. I'm a reporter with Injustice Watch, a nonprofit newsroom in Chicago. I cover immigrations and prisons. We have two very distinguished guests with us today to talk about this important issue. Alex Narsta is the Director of Immigration Studies at the Cato Institute, and Kathy Brady, Senior Staff Attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center. A 2018 policy analysis by the Cato Institute argues that legalizing cannabis at the border, more so than interdiction and enforcement alone. At the same time, human rights activists point out that immigrants entering the United States can have their status revoked and denied for consuming cannabis or working in the cannabis industry, even in states where it is legal. So Alex, to start out with you, Justin, can you please make it clear for our audience, how does the federal government treat marijuana offenses when it comes to immigrants?
So it treats them badly. I mean, marijuana is a Schedule I drug in the federal government, and marijuana convictions of people who are non-citizens here exposes them to deportation, removal of their legal status, and removal from the United States. What it also makes a big deal, or has a big impact, is along the border. And what we've seen is since states have begun to legalize marijuana and also increased medical marijuana legality across the country, we've seen sort of a collapse in the amount of marijuana being smuggled into the United States. We've seen immigration numbers also go down, but primarily what we've seen is just a collapse in this sort of black market cross-border flow of illicit substances when these illicit substances are legalized, of course. Makes a lot of sense. So what we've seen is sort of a decrease in a lot of the chaos and illegality on the border, as we've seen sort of a steady legalization on the state level. But this legalization on the state level does not affect the federal government's classification of these drugs as Schedule I. It's still unlawful to import them. It's just there's less of a reason to do so now because it's legal in so many large markets inside of the United States. But it has a tremendous impact on the people who are here, especially who are not citizens in the United States.
Kathy, so just to go off of what Alex said there, how frequently is cannabis possession, consumption, outwardly or just anything related with cannabis used against immigrants in the immigration process, whether it is attaining citizenship or work permits or DACA? How often is it that immigrants run into these trials and tribulations because of weed?
It's incredibly often. It's a very serious problem. Sometimes in some periods, for example, for a 5-year period, we deported 34,000 people whose most serious criminal offense was possession of a small amount of marijuana. And, you know, we hear a lot about deportations, but it's it's kind of like a disappearance of a family member. And there's the human loss, and then it's a small economic catastrophe, and people lose houses and kids go to foster care. So it's a very, very big, terrible penalty that's affected tens of thousands of people. I would hope to say that it's getting better now that there's legalization and in many states, and in some ways it is, but in some ways it's not. You can really divide the kind of penalties that people suffer from marijuana. Do you have a conviction because it was illegal where you used it? Or you might use it innocently in a state where it's legalized and still be deported for that because, like Alex said, it's on the federal Schedule I list. And immigration, no matter where you live, is governed by federal law.
Say, for example, I am an undocumented immigrant in a state where consumption of cannabis is legal. How could it be, or how is it that immigration authorities find out that I consumed cannabis?
Well, they ask you. And you say, This has happened. I've had so many consultations. In Washington, D.C., there was a man, he was married to a U.S. citizen. He's undocumented. They have an infant. It's been legal in D.C. for a while. He went to the adjustment interview where he was going to get a green card through his wife. And they said, have you ever used marijuana? And he said literally, well, yeah, after it was legalized, I used it twice at a couple of parties, but I actually don't care for it. And they said, okay, you just admitted 2 times. We are not going to give you your green card. You are undocumented, so we're going to deport you. And there is no possibility of a waiver or any other way you can stay here. Now, some states like Washington State, where it's been legal for several years, they have a system set up in the office where they get people to sign these affidavits to formally admit to marijuana, and they ask a very large percentage of naturalization applicants and applicants for green cards. If I could, there's 2 issues here if you don't have a conviction. We can talk about convictions later. One is use, and the other is if you ever are employed in the industry.
Right.
The Obama administration, in many ways, was no friend to immigrants. However, the Trump administration especially has singled out marijuana. And a year ago, they made an official rule that says if you have ever worked in the legitimate, multi-zillion-dollar cannabis industry, you cannot naturalize because you have bad moral character and you're a drug trafficker. And just this year, and it's hard to believe this, in June 2020, the Department of State added to its official foreign affairs manual, we're looking at you as you come into the US, if you indicate any intention to seek work in the cannabis industry, we will exclude you as a national security risk. So it's not connected to reality, and it's an odd federal policy. I mean, the main thing I care about is these poor individuals, but it's also targeting the industry.
That's not connected to reality is a great way to summarize, I think, almost all immigration law in the United States and enforcement. Just to build off of what Kathy was saying, from 2009 to 2017, and this is a way that people, by the way, play tricks with numbers, right? About half of the people who were deported from the United States had some kind of criminal conviction. And a lot of immigration restrictionists will try to build this up as saying they're all criminals. But when you take a look at that, a large percent, the most common offense is an immigration offense, but the second most is some kind of drug offense. And of those drug offenses, for marijuana, it's about 12% of them. And these are offenses that I think across the board are victimless crimes, for the vast majority of them anyway, victimless crimes that people engage in a lot of cases, and voluntary legal behavior, legal on the state level, and it is ruining their chance to become an American citizen, to get a green card, or to be able to otherwise stay and work legally in the United States, merely for taking part in the consumption of an item that is popular and legal in many states and will be legal in more states in the very near future. I wouldn't be surprised if in the next 10 years, the federal government removes it from its Schedule 1 list and the vast majority of states have it legal. And we're separating people from their families, separating them from their businesses, from their work, from their life, from their property, from their relationships and friends, for what seems to me to be one of the worst reasons given for doing this. And it has, unfortunately gone worse in the last several years.
And Alex, just to stay with you on that point, are states doing a good enough job of letting their citizens or their non-citizen residents know the risks they're taking when consuming these quote unquote legalized products within their state borders?
States, Colorado, I think, got most mad at the Trump administration when they rescinded a memo called the Cole memo, which was put in place during the Obama administration, basically said that they weren't really going to go after marijuana when it was legal in a particular state. It wasn't going to be a big deal for them. And the Trump administration basically rescinded that memo and allowed local, like federal prosecutors to go after people however they wanted. And that led to sort of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of problems. So that's produced sort of a lot of chaos. Like a lot of states, frankly, don't really know where they stand. They don't know where their non-citizen populations stand. And it's difficult to communicate that idea of, well, on the state level, it's legal and you won't get in trouble by the state authorities. But if the feds catch you, you could be in very serious trouble. But they might not target you. It depends on the prosecutor. It's a very confusing situation, I think, for everyone to be in. And states like Colorado have written letters to the Department of Justice asking for clarification on this. And as far as I know, Kathy probably knows a lot more about this, but the feds have not been too forthcoming in issuing a lot of clarification here.
In fact, it was the mayor of Denver who wrote a letter after two Colorado residents were denied naturalization because they worked in the industry. One was an agricultural labor, one was like an accountant. And he wrote and said, this can't be right. You can't deny them. They pay state and federal taxes. This is our great Colorado industry. And in response, the Trump administration formalized the policy. Like immediately afterwards, they put out this in USCIS, which handles naturalization, the policy that said it does not matter if it's legal under a state. It's still drug trafficking and bad moral character. And it also, just in terms of social policy, as we see this federal legislation going forward, like the MORE Act or the States Act, the MORE Act is legislation that would legalize marijuana. It also has a lot of social justice, racial justice provisions. The people who've been most hurt by the war on drugs should get some of the jobs, should get some recompense. And with this immigration mandate, this huge block of people of color absolutely cannot work. And in California, we have an outreach program to tell farm workers, I know marijuana is less kind of deadly and hot and difficult than other farm work, but you cannot take these jobs. We worked with the California EDD to put out an official memo to people saying, if you're not a citizen, don't work these jobs. And there's, by the way, I've provided a one-pager that you can get with this presentation that gives a link to our website, but we put out flyers in English, Spanish, and Chinese and said, don't work at these jobs. And it also said, don't use marijuana. If you have a real medical need, get consultation. Possibly we could do it. Never wear a marijuana t-shirt. Never have a photo on your phone with marijuana, because people have totally been picked up at the border because they went through their Facebook things, they went through their pictures, and they just looked like maybe they like marijuana.
Yeah, I mean, a good rule of thumb, I think, when thinking about this administration's response is one of the things they really believe in policy-wise is being anti-immigration. Yes. Anti-legal immigration, trying to deport as many people as possible and keep as many people out. And they will use every possible legal justification, no matter how flimsy, no matter how unjust, no matter how arbitrary, in order to exclude people from being able to live and work lawfully in the United States. So it's one of these things where you just need to keep that in mind every time. Like, there's not going to be sort of a fair, reasonable, thoughtful way in which the government views any of these kinds of infractions during this administration. This is hard line, and it will have a serious impact.
I think that's completely right. I don't know that this is motivated by being against the industry. I think they just look for every single way. And legalization of marijuana in states, as great as it is, creates a community thing about marijuana. And I went through Union Square in San Francisco, and there's this big bus that has a bus sign that says, use marijuana, it's not a crime. And, everywhere I go in California or Washington or states, there's huge billboards offering to deliver marijuana to you. And people have no reason to know that they're doing anything illegal.
That raises an important question, I think, is given that it is so confusing on the legal aspect of things, what should the industry be doing to, one, make it clear that their products are not equally consumed under the law by everyone, but also to maybe advocate for these restrictions and these penalties to go away? Like, what role does the industry play in making immigrants safe consumers of their products?
The industry needs to put up warning signs under the law as it is to say, they don't have to ask people to confess, just say, if you are not a citizen of the United States, you should be warned that either working here or consuming marijuana can hurt you. But more to the point, I think the industry really needs to support legislation like the MORE Act, which would make everything better for them because the banking issues, all the issues go away. I mean, there are other acts like the currently proposed States Act that might clear up the problems for the industry, but would only help in states where marijuana is legal. And I think would just create more confusion. If I could just mention that the thing I left out is what if you get convicted of marijuana and there's possession of marijuana. We had another person we helped who was a grandmother who used marijuana as part of an old folklore remedy her family had. She grew a small marijuana plant, put it in oil and rubbed it on her arthritic elbow.
My grandma does the same.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she, for some reason, got busted for it. Currently in California, that would be an infraction, less than a misdemeanor, but it would be termed an aggravated felony. And she was going to be deported. She was in her 60s. She'd had a green card forever. She had US citizen grandchildren and children. And we actually literally got to her before she was put on a plane after this huge legal effort to go in and undo the conviction. So just, handing someone a joint, that can all become trafficking. Or people who have a certain amount of marijuana often have to plead guilty to possession for sale. That is an aggravated felony. It's basically treated just like how they would treat heroin and cocaine. And we could discuss the problems with how they treat those. But the argument is marijuana has neither the effect nor the public perception of those.
It is very scary to think about. I mean, just to imagine that. I mean, I must ask, was she eventually deported or did?
No, my colleague at our nonprofit put in a huge amount of effort and stopped it. But of course, low-income people, she was very lucky to get a free lawyer from a nonprofit. But I am sure positive tens of thousands of families have been affected by this. And again, it's a real family. It's a real infant. It's just a terribly traumatic thing. Daddy's gone now. Daddy's in Cambodia. Okay.
And just for our viewers and listeners who aren't aware, immigrants don't have a right to a defense attorney afforded by the public when they go through their proceedings. So,
the government has an attorney to unravel this incredibly complicated immigration law, but they represent themselves. I mean, famously, they've been having the young children represent themselves sometimes.
Right. Alex, I know you mentioned that, it seems as though we're hitting a brick wall with the Trump administration when it comes to making these policies reflect just normality, just the way things maybe should be. But what movement have you seen on the other side of the aisle, particularly among the Biden proposals and his any policy updates on his end that would perhaps change things on this issue?
The Biden campaign has proposed several reforms to the legal immigration system that would make things a lot better, a lot more open, including lawful legalization of current unauthorized immigrants who aren't violent or property offenders, expanding legal immigration. They've called for some things that could make some sections of legal immigration more difficult, like more regulations on workers coming in, etc. But all in all, it's a pretty vast improvement over what has happened over the last several years. Now, one of the things, of course, to keep in mind is what we've really seen during the Trump administration is the amount of power that the president has over admitting people to the United States, of basically writing immigration law on the fly, banning people from any country for any reason, creating even more stringent restrictions for certain people based on basically whatever he wants, is something that is with us now in the law, and all future presidents are going to have this power unless the Supreme Court reverses itself, which I don't think it will. So there's a lot of scope for the administration to legalize or to at least legalize the entry of future unlawful immigrants future immigrants without having to go through and get legislation passed by Congress. But passing legislation to legalize people who are here unlawfully, we'd see a lot of improvements in that. Now, the Democrats have also improved their stance on drugs. And by improve, I mean they're much more likely to support legalizing certain drugs than they used to be, which is a great improvement, and expanding legal immigration. So I have confidence that if any Democrat does get elected president in the future, then there will be improvements along these lines. And one of the things that gives me hope is just Democrats in general, beginning from 2006 to today. It went from about 40% of Democrats thinking that immigration was a good thing for the country to now it's about 90% of Democrats. So you've seen, and Republicans, by the way, haven't gone worse over this time period, surprisingly. It's just that the president is a lot worse, who's a Republican. So we see like this sea change in the country where Democrats and independents are much more supportive, and Republicans are about where they've always been. So I think the scope for improvement in the future is vast. And in the short term, especially if a Biden administration comes in.
You know, unless I'm making a terrible mistake, but I don't think I am, Kamala Harris introduced the MORE Act into the Senate. Now, whether Joe Biden is on that train, I do not know, but it's very interesting that Kamala was. She was very good about that. And we hope that the MORE Act might get out of the House before the holidays. There's so much going on. I don't know if they would get to it, but it got out of committee.
But I think on a minimum, we can expect the Biden administration to at least go back to the Cole memo, like at a very minimum. And hopefully they can go a lot further than that in terms of trying to sort of limit the federal involvement in the states in marijuana and trying to be just more activist in deporting people who are non-citizens who get convicted of marijuana convictions. I mean, one of the things that Biden has had to live down during the primaries is the Obama administration's harsh deportation policies.
Right.
And he took a lot of grief from that, and deservedly so. So I think he's going to try to make a mark if he gets in and sort of relaxing that a lot. I hope.
The last word on that, if I could say, is to help immigrants, we have to get it off the federal schedule.
Yes.
State by state can't do it because it's governed by federal law. Or we have to make some piecemeal amendment to the Immigration Act, and I don't think anybody wants to go there because who knows what that could blow up into.
But I think we can all agree, legalization. Of marijuana and of immigrants, separately or together, big improvements to American society.
Big humanity, big economy, big improvements.
Across the board.
I can't think of a better note to end but that one. So thank you both of you very much for participating in this panel, and I hope all of you watching found it informative.
Well, that was a great discussion. It really helped me understand more on how the war on drugs has impacted immigrants in our country. My parents were immigrants from South America, and gaining legal status was an incredible accomplishment for them that took a lot of time, effort, and a lot of hard-earned money. So it's really frightening to know that something as simple as cannabis possession could have derailed my parents' dreams. Throughout the U.S. immigration process, from start to finish, applicants are made aware not to take any missteps whatsoever for fear of being denied status. And being denied is something that victims of the war on drugs deal with every day. Right now, there are 40,000 people incarcerated in the United States for cannabis-related offenses. Many of those folks will walk around for the rest of their lives with charges on their records that will prevent them from receiving critical benefits and social services, and for many, even the right to vote. It's my pleasure to introduce our next presenter, Amber Center, Executive Director for Supernova Women.
Hello,